It's showtime. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are back for our first episode of 2023. We are thrilled to be with you all today to discuss something that we all have different ideas about, opinions on, and how to go about it. So I definitely look forward to unpacking portfolio and challenge work today with you all. But before we get started, let me welcome some of my favorite co hosts. Who wants to go first? You're both my favorite, so I can't choose one.
I think Bill should go first then.
I was going to
Bill.
say, Ginny, you should go first.
Too late.
All right. Since you went first to nominate me, I'll go first.
Good.
Hey, everybody. I'm Bill Shander. I'm very excited to be here also talking about this very important topic. I am a data visualization practitioner, meaning I do data visualization for people, for clients, for work. But even more so these days, I teach it. So I teach here on LinkedIn Learning. I teach classes, a class at the University of Vermont, and I teach workshops for clients around the world. I love it. I'm excited about it. In addition to data viz, I also do teach some data analytics stuff. In fact, next week, I'm teaching a 4-day intensive workshop on data analytics, Excel, Power BI, and data storytelling and visualization. I'm very pumped up, but also like scrambling this week. Like, oh yeah, how do you do an index match formula again? What's an XLOOKUP again? Like, reminding myself all the stuff I need to remember how to do. Like, I can't be Googling in the middle of a workshop, So,
yeah, that's funny.
Once you know XLOOKUP, index match, you can kind of put in your back pocket.
I know, it's funny. I realized that. I was like, I'm not going to teach index match anymore because XLOOKUP actually does replace that. So
yeah. And now you may have offended a whole subculture of match and index on the internet, but whatever. The other side, VLOOKUP is also they're like that's a thing. Yeah. Awesome. Ginny, tell everybody about you.
I'm largely a trainer these days. I do a small amount of consulting, but mostly train. You see me here on LinkedIn Learning. I'm in the Power Platform, Power BI space. So I benefit from having lots of good work done by Robin and Bill so that people know why they might want to do something and what their best practices are and how to make things, how to create the things they want to create, to communicate what they want to create. And then I'll show you how to do that in Power BI. That's kind of where the space I live in regards to data analysis. But I've been working in data for a long time. I won't say how many years, but more than we have to measure it in decades. So, and at different times in my career, I've actually been a data analyst.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I got about 2 decades in at this point. So if you've got more than that, then you were really back in the day when data was not the sexy thing, when all the tools were hard. But I would not take away those times where all the tools were hard because it forced us to learn logic and scenarios and best practices that are now sometimes easily to miss with these very powerful tools.
I'll just say 2 words that say how hard it can be. My first stat project was done using punch cards.
Oh. That's too hard. I agree with Robin. Like, going back a certain amount is good, but punch cards, no thank you.
No use. No use anymore.
Yeah. Well, I once had a data project where I had to categorize punch cards, which they would come to me. They were like, "We have these aperture cards," and I'm like, "What? What are they talking about?" And they was like, "Yeah, this is how we used to do it." And I'm like, glad I wasn't here for that. Yeah. Because I don't understand. That's a visualization I can't get down with. I could still visualize those cards and be like, I don't know how this works at all.
And you drop a snap once and you're done.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about the ridiculous old days of analog, actual object-based stuff, I can say also I go back to when I was doing, I did like web design and development for years, and I did multimedia presentations. I did interactive CD-ROMs, which is actually like the modern version of what preceded that, which was overhead transparencies.
Okay.
And so when I first started, I was designing slides that would be printed on a freaking transparency and then like shipped to an event and showing up on the screen that way.
That is
So,
awesome.
yeah, also ridiculous. That's like
Yeah.
terrible.
Yeah.
Thank God those days are over.
But like, just be glad we had those days though, because otherwise, what were we doing? They were like drawing pictures on the walls.
And on a chalkboard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there we were designing on a chalkboard. So
Yes.
yeah, overheads were a great thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I early in my training career, I would train from the back of the classroom because we didn't use overhead projection. And so I would have
Right.
to eyeball the back of the screen so I could see that everybody was with me.
Right.
So I never had, and I'm grateful for it because it taught me a lot about how humans interpret what I'm saying. And I could control my classroom that way. But just fascinating. I never had a projector as a crutch. So now if the equipment goes to pot, I don't care. Like, okay, like we do it. We're doing it.
Yep.
We're doing it because I just stand back here.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's also, again, I think it's important for us to kind of have those conversations because we've been at it for a minute. We've seen a lot. We've seen a lot. We're actual practitioners of this, and we do because we're all trainers in some form and also LinkedIn learning authors. Like we find a lot of people are looking for insights into like, how do I showcase my skills and how do I set myself apart and what can I do when this is not what I do? And I thought it would be great for us to come together and kind of unpack portfolios and just kind of jump into the discussion because sometimes I see them and I'm like, oh, sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a good one. So let's just dive into it. So,
Actually, can I stop you for 1 second,
yeah,
Robin?
yeah.
You didn't introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Robin. Hi, I'm Robin Hunt. I'm co-founder of Think Data. I am a data practitioner of just about every level. I would never consider myself a data scientist, however. I just wouldn't. I do some of those data sciencey type things, but that's not what my role is. And I do love to provide data education in addition to like being in the data. So I get to have the best of both worlds. I get to actually dive into data and do things and study things. And I've built my portfolio by actually doing work. And excited about that back in a time when data was not, everybody just thought I was the weirdo who did Excel in the background. So yeah, that's me. Thanks, Bill.
Sure.
I appreciate that. All right. So let's talk about portfolio versus challenge work. And is there a difference? I think that's the question I want to start with because to me, the lines are very blurry. So the first question to unpack is portfolio versus challenge work. Are they the same? Not the same? Let's dive in.
So when you say challenge work, I want to make sure everybody understands what you mean by challenge work.
Mm-hmm. So for me, challenge work is, well, we do this in our boot camp. So we'll say, here's a data set. And we're looking for these things. Go. And then that's their challenge. But then we also have other challenges. Like one of my most favorite is called 3 families. And we describe 3 families. And then the challenge is figure out where should those 3 families live based on their constraints in our local area. And so it really forces you to like really dive in. So when I think about challenge work, it's prompts like that. Maybe data sets come with it. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's just questions.
Okay.
So that's how I look at challenge work.
Okay.
Anybody else got an opinion on what they think? Bill, what do you think challenge work is?
Yeah, that's the way I would have described it also. It's more of like the prompt is you're literally trying to solve a challenge with data. And to me, that gets to my answer to your question, which is that they're different separate things, but the one might produce the other. So in other words, you can address a challenge and solve it and come up with this great thing, and then it hides in a file drawer somewhere and never sees the light of day, then it doesn't become a portfolio piece. You can also make a portfolio piece, especially in my world, data visualization. I could create a visualization of data. Maybe I see a cool infographic or a visualization on Reddit, and I just like recreate it and I just make it pretty. I can put that on my portfolio, but that's not a challenge.
Mm,
So they're both separate things and they can be done without the other. But I think what I would argue for most people is that you should be doing challenge-based portfolios, because that'll be the most impactful portfolio for your work. And we'll talk a lot more about that throughout this conversation. So
yeah. Awesome. So I think it's interesting too, like before we were getting into this, like I made an offensive remark to Bill Shander about it. It was really just a misspeak about it's easy for Viz. And he was like, I don't believe it's easy for Viz. And it is absolutely not easy for Viz. So I think sometimes what happens for those budding data workers, data analysts, is that the visual outcome seems like the portfolio piece. And because you have a visual outcome, it makes great for, because when I think about portfolios, I think about all the artists I know, right?
yeah,
They have this
especially that word is just
portfolio.
used.
Yeah. And you've got this, you can flip through and see all the art. And I think that's just one component, but that's an easier component of building a portfolio when you're a visualization. I can go ahead and tell you that none of my visuals are like the artistic beautiful. They may be functional, they may work, they may tell an absolutely amazing story, but I'm not data is beautiful over here.
Right.
On Reddit.
Well, it's funny. I'm glad you brought up Data is Beautiful, because the Data is Beautiful Reddit channel has some beautiful visualizations. It also has some dog ugly visualizations, which are still really cool because the data, the challenge, the other parts that make up a great portfolio are well solved. And so it's ironic that they use that name, Data is Beautiful, because some of it is absolutely not beautiful, but it is some of them. Frequently, they're interesting challenges. A problem was solved, and then they created a visual. And to your point, the visual is, it's easy from the standpoint that it is easily recognized as a portfolio. And then, if you're doing data work and you don't generate the visual output, or the visual output isn't very pretty, then it just feels to some people less like a portfolio. But it still is, and that's a big important part of the conversation, right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, I know too, for our research that we do for early childhood education, we don't do any of the visualization. We are merely providing the data for research, and then the researchers get it and they do all the stats work. And so it's like, okay, so if I were going to do that for a portfolio piece, I couldn't do that, but I can drop the link of the team, right? I can say this is the production of that work, and then you can see the outcome. So that's also a challenge. So maybe we should talk a little bit about things that you can do when there's not a picture per se to throw into a portfolio. So interesting. Where do you put it? Because again, we're not artists here. So we're not walking around handing off our portfolio trying to get into an art show, right? So I want to hear your thoughts on like how do you, whether it's a challenge that you did online, you tried something that was on Data is Beautiful. I don't care where you came about getting it, or if you were paid for it or not paid for it. I think Jenny's got some good feedback on that. Where do we put these things? Like, how can we tell people where do they go? I mean, I hate the resume and CV land. I wish we could just do away with resumes altogether. I just think they're trash. But whatever, that's just my opinion. I think somewhere they're going to be on a resume somewhere. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, like, before we get into how you find some, like if you got some, how do you get that out there for people to see?
I see people include them in LinkedIn Learning, all the time. And maybe it's because like somebody will finish a Power BI course and, that we'll get a post that says so-and-so completed your course. But at least every couple of weeks, I get something where somebody actually posts an entire dashboard that they built. Not necessarily what we were doing in the class, right? But something totally different. And they're just posting it and including it as part of their profile, part of their work product.
That's awesome, isn't it?
Yeah,
very rewarding. Very rewarding to see that. Yeah. So, Bill, what's your thoughts?
Yeah. So I actually have a good example. My newest not my newest course. It's actually my oldest course. My first course was called Learning Data Visualization. I did it years ago, and I just this year did a full update of it. And in the update, I just sort of completely changed how I communicated how to learn how to do data visualization. And I decided to base it all on a single data set. And so I'm looking all over the place, trying to find a fun data set. The same thing you would do, like you're saying, if you needed to create a challenge for as a prompt for people. And it's hard to find good data for these kinds of things. But I found a data set that was just like, it warmed the cockles of my heart personally, in that it was about burritos. Okay. It was a data set from a guy named Sean Cole. I think I have his name correctly. He surveyed all the burrito, maybe not every single, but a lot of burrito joints all around San Diego, and even enlisted other people to help. And they rated these burritos on their overall quality, on the weight and the width and the length and the how much salsa and the meat to filling ratio and all these great little metrics. And then, to getting back to what we're talking about, in addition to that being a really cool data set for me to play with, he created a page on GitHub, and I saw somebody mention GitHub.
Oh yeah.
Okay. If you're creating stuff, unlike the old days, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, where can you put this stuff? Geez, I don't know. Like you have to build your own website, go to WordPress.org or whatever. Nowadays, GitHub, you can just throw stuff up there, and it's not just for coders, right? You can just throw content on GitHub.
Right.
He just wrote an article essentially, put some pictures in it, some of the output. And explain his methodology and the key insights.
Oh, for
and
it.
Blah, blah, blah.
Oh, I'm for that. I am so for that.
Even without a visual, it would have been a great little article about this data set and what he found out about burritos in San Diego. And he also had visuals in there, which of course, me, I think makes it even better.
Yeah. Well, anytime we can visualize data, it makes it better, right? Like when you can actually show a visual of the data, because I know this from Bill Shander himself, that's the way our brains are wired. So I love that. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. I came up when GitHub was coming out, and it was, it was for coders and branches and keeping our coding consistent. And I guess I really hadn't put it together that might be a great place to like establish your ongoing portfolio. But I think you said something very key there, is that this person explained the methodology. Yep. And I know for me, that's what I want to see. Like you can show me all kinds of things. I know I get that part. But how did you get here? So I would say if you're going to add to your portfolio outside of the outcome itself, adding and including the methodology, I think could be hugely impactful.
Yeah. And that gets to why are we creating this thing in the first place, right? Yeah. We're creating it to show what we know and what we're doing, essentially maybe to get jobs or whatever. And the methodology, it's funny because I always talk about how for a presentation, like I'm going before the board of my company next week to present the key insights from this internal data. They don't want to hear about your stupid methodology. Like, it should be in the appendix, if anywhere. But for something like this, that should be front and center because you're showing what you know, what you've learned, why your methodology, why your analysis is credible, et cetera, et cetera. So sorry, Gini, I cut you off.
The other thing I was thinking in terms of an explanation is often, and we've talked about this before, how do you communicate as a data analyst with folks in your organization? Writing an article about your methodology or breaking out your methodology is a way of actually demonstrating that you can explain things to people who are not data analysts.
Can you give me some hearts to put on this thing? Like I would be blowing this whole thing up with heart reactions right now if I could do it. That is so. It also addresses soft skills.
Yep.
That you must have. Like, Bill, you're right. You're going to stand up in front of your board and you're going to say, this is the outcomes they're looking for, very specific information in that specific moment in time. But by God, if you are wrong and they make the wrong decision, they're coming for the methodology because they're going to have to see how you got them in this boat so they can hold you accountable for it. So there's a lot to be said for that. But when you're learning, how do you know what your gaps are? That's a good, easy way to build soft skills. There's no way if you go into a job and you present an outcome and you also couple it with a methodology, like it will be sound. I love that. I'm not speaking anymore. I'm just going to let y'all talk for the rest of this time, and I'm just going to absorb all this greatness.
No.
Well, to your point about gaps, you share that portfolio out. And if you don't have the methodology in there, someone, like not just someone, 42% of the people who see that portfolio are going to be like, how the hell did you come up with that number? That seems like crap. And here's why, because you didn't do XYZ methodology. If methodology there, then they can see, oh yeah, you actually did it the right way. I do know what you're talking about. Now I understand why this number is different from my number, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I just love that so much. That's so good. So key takeaways here are, there's plenty of sites you can go get inspired. But if you really want to put your portfolio out there live and active and continue to add on to it, GitHub is a good choice. And then also including a little bit more than the outcome, like why you started doing this, how you got here, and how you got to this outcome, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
And if you're in a position where you're looking for work, then I just say these things because I think it makes sense, is that back on your LinkedIn profile, you need a link that says, see my work on GitHub. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't make this hard for anybody. I think when people are looking right now for folks, they don't have a lot of time to do the work you could have done to make it easy for them.
Yeah.
So, connect to stuff wherever you are. If you're building a good portfolio on GitHub and you're still a person who hands out business cards or in your email signature, wherever it is, here's my portfolio. Make it easy to get to.
I'm going Bill Shander. I'm making my own hearts over here. I'm drawing my own hearts over here. This is me flying up hearts on that feedback. That is so good. That is so good.
I want to add something too to what we were talking about just before, what Gini just said, which is brilliant. I agree. I have to sort of rephrase something, which is that I think a portfolio you can think of as being sort of two pieces. It doesn't have to be two pieces, but it often may end up being two pieces. Like when I create things, sometimes the output that I create is the story. So for instance, I'll do a data story. I did one last year on, can you be in the Olympics if you're over 50?
Right.
And the output that I created was essentially like a web-based scrolly telling data story. So it was literally, I can read the data story as though I was reading an article in the newspaper and see all the visuals. That's a portfolio piece for me. And that's what you see on my website.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're talking about now, methodology, why I did it this way, all this stuff is the how-to article about how I created this thing over here.
Right.
And I think a good portfolio really ideally would have both of those. Definitely have to have the how-to article, especially for like a data portfolio, not a data visualization portfolio. But if you're going to create some sort of actual output, like a data story type of a thing, you got to have that how-to article. And I like to sort of think about it in those terms. And I'll say, like in the data visualization world, it is very common nowadays to, yes, produce the output, the thing, and then to do like a companion how-to article, which really makes that portfolio come to life.
That's fantastic. I think it's also intimidating, right? Because you have so many beginners out there who are trying to they're trying to pursue this. So it's like the idea of like one of the things we said was like how to work with portfolio work when you have it and when you don't. So when you don't, these are things that you're trying to achieve. That doesn't mean you do it first one out the gate, right? So I think that's where challenge work kind of comes in. At some point, you're going to be confident in what you're doing, and then the idea of writing a how-to article is going to make sense to you. So if hearing how do I do this, and then I got to write a how-to article seems kind of foreign, that tells you where you're at. I mean, that would just be my opinion.
But even that, what I would recommend, I don't care if this is day one of your data analysis journey. You may not publish your how-to article because you feel like you don't know enough, but do a how-to bit anyways, even if it's just notes to self, because you're going to tell yourself, well, here's how I approach it, and here's my methodology even, and then that's something you can refer back to your point about learning gaps and progress. It's kind of like, they say that, the best way to learn something is to teach it. This is like teaching, right? When you create a how-to article about what you just did, it's almost like you're sharing it with another person. Even if you don't publish it, you're walking through that process of figuring out how to explain it, which not only develops those soft skills that we talked about, but reinforces what you've learned about the analysis process. So I know it's intimidating, but I would still recommend people do it, even if it never sees the light of day.
Well, and when you're working through it too, like, I mean, I know when we're doing education, we're telling people like, write your notes down, write your notes down, write your notes down, like, right while you did that. I mean, like, even if you're just
Yeah.
note taking as you're going through, like, you could maybe
100%.
return back to that and be like, okay, this is how I went about it. Ginny, what were your thoughts?
I just wanted to point out that for folks that don't use GitHub yet or don't know GitHub, that you might want to know that there's a course on LinkedIn Learning that is called Learning GitHub,
Oh, yes.
which would give you a place to start and how to set up GitHub for your own use.
I love
I
that.
think we probably have more than one course, but that one's a beginner's course. If you're on GitHub, start there.
Bill, let's do it at the same time. I think we need to do it.
Okay.
We have to make them fly at the same time.
Do this,
There
okay?
you go. Look at that. There you go. That's what's up, Jenny Von Quarter, which we may start calling you Jenny Von Power. You were talking about, you're in the power platform. I thought she just needs to be Jenny Von Power going forward here.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just kind of want to talk about, like, what are the benefits of challenges we find online? Because a lot of people find challenges online. They're following people that put out challenges. Like, what? So, like, if we could, like, give some of the key benefits.
If you're not currently in a practice where you're being challenged, that to me is the very first thing. There are times in your work that either you're not employed or you're employed and you're doing something that's pulling you away from your core competency or what you're trying to build towards. So if you're working to work in data analytics and you spend 7 months instead managing a program team. I've done this before. And it's like the whole industry is walking past you while you're doing something else that you're valued for and you're good at. But how do you stay fresh during that time? To me, the online challenges absolutely do that for us. Is there's a way to at least engage in some practice. And since you're already working and you're going crazy with project management, you don't necessarily want to take on a great big new project. What you want is something that will keep your brain engaged and keep you moving forward and keep you thinking about it.
Oh,
so
I love that.
That's the first thing to me, is it allows you to work when you don't it allows you to be challenged with data analytics at a time that your work doesn't do that for you. So that's one. Two is some of those challenges are actually communities. So you're gaining colleagues. And even if you're already working, maybe you're the only person in your data area, or maybe there's 2 or 3 of you, but it's just not that great of a community. Some of the challenges are actually ongoing communities where you can then have colleagues that you can talk to about real work and people you can ask questions of. So those are a couple things I'd pitch out.
That's excellent. Bill, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll add a couple too. One, maybe you're doing product management or whatever, like you said, Ginny, completely different job. Maybe you're even in data work, but you're just an order taker. Hey, pull this data. Hey, pull that data. You're not being asked to do the next level up of activities that you want to develop. Another thing is the alternative to doing like an online challenge is to find your own data set, like about burritos, if you love burritos, and run with it. But maybe you don't have access to data, or you don't have an idea for something that you're passionate about and that you can really think of the challenge. So you may find a data set, but then if you're a beginner, you may not know exactly what questions you can or should be asking of that data set. Challenges queue up interesting, challenging questions, which especially beginners will have a harder time doing.
Right.
So I think that's a big advantage, that the challenges will not only be interesting and something that maybe you wouldn't have thought of, but oftentimes they'll also be aligned with particular skill building ideas.
Oh, I like
so
that.
for instance, the challenge could be, here's a data set about burritos. Where's the best burrito? Well, that's really not much of a challenge, right? Like I can just, sort it by the score and I guess I'm done, right? But the challenge could instead be kind of like what you mentioned, Robin, about your more nuanced, take your families and figure out the best place for them to live based on 12 criteria. That's the kind of thing a challenge can really queue up, and you'll need different skills to really find an answer to that challenge.
think there's also a really good key benefit to doing challenge work, especially if you're exploring data as a career choice, is that you may decide it's not a career choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're looking at these challenges and every time you look at them, you're filled with dread, it's maybe not what you want to be doing for a
It's
living.
not going to get better from there.
Not going to get better from there. And then the stakes become higher. So I think there's a lot of benefits to people doing challenges to see where you are. But now, to be fair, you can't do one challenge and make that decision. Like,
No.
you can't just do one and make that decision. But I
Yeah.
think there's some benefits like that maybe, maybe I really don't want to do this part of data. Maybe I really thrived in this part of it, but I didn't like that part of it. And I think there's some benefits to that. So even if you didn't get to what the challenge was intended to be, you will learn so much about yourself in the process. I think it's absolutely worth it. But yeah, if it fills you with dread, like you do 5 different challenges and all 5 fill you with dread, like at some point you need to start asking yourself, maybe not this, maybe go try a different challenge and see if you have a different type of feeling or outcome.
All of a sudden, a job in entry-level retail is looking better by the minute.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
That's
I've done that too.
funny. Yeah. Well, I mean, I know, again, I feel like I say this every episode. I sat in a class once and they were talking about subnet masking, and I went, this is not for me. I know if I have to hear her say TCP IP or subnet masking or IPv4 or 6, or this is when 4 was out and 6 was coming. That's how old it was. I was like, I'm done. Like, but I didn't quit tech. That's why I say, don't just get disenchanted with one challenge. And also too, the challenge may have not been properly set, or it may not have been the greatest one. Yeah, I love the idea of community though, Jenny. I think that's so important, is if you can have a community with people you can feed off of each other in a very positive way as you grow your skills.
Well, that's another thing Jenny said before we came on live. You were talking about the idea that some of these challenges are put out by nonprofits. And so maybe you can actually make the world a better place while you're building your skills, while you're building a portfolio. So, sounded like you had some experience doing that.
Well, there are nonprofits that do data challenges. There are big nonprofits that do that. I was focused more on small nonprofits. I know that sometimes people are thinking, how do I present some work? If I present just these challenges, it looks like all I do is what I've learned online. And of course, there's the issue with things that you do for a challenge, for example, is there's no real accountability for that. There's no customer at the other end who can ask you questions. And also, sometimes what you get is a really clean, pristine data set, unlike anything you would see in the real world. And so you haven't really had the workout of, here's what our data looks like. We'd like to know this. And you saying, oh, that's a big leap, right? So we have to clean your data first and perhaps even enhance your data. However, I think that there are lots of nonprofits, of even medium-sized not-for-profit organizations, that have lots of data that don't have a data department. Maybe they have somebody who's doing a little bit of analysis in Excel. And if you were to find out what their data needs are, like a nonprofit that get some services from, or you have some organization knowledge of them, is to actually volunteer to do some work for them. If you're looking for a way to add something to your portfolio, I think there's a benefit to doing real work for real people, as opposed to challenges, because as Bill said, you really could help make the world a better place by helping a not-for-profit be more effective. Regardless of who you are, or what kinds of things you're interested in, you will probably find a not-for-profit working in an area of your passion where you could spend some time on a project and then have something to put in your portfolio that, even though you weren't paid for it, it's actually work. And I don't think you have to say, I wasn't paid for this, I did this as a volunteer. This is part of your work experience.
I mean, yeah. I think the key thing there is, well, you may not have gotten paid cash for it.
Right.
But if you learn skills, you got paid. And I think one of the very key things that you said is the accountability factor. sometimes on the online challenges, unless you are the most beautiful one to the party, you're not getting picked for the one that they're posting online, right? But if
That's
you
true.
are doing that kind of work with a nonprofit or really any organization or any group where there's a data need, like there is that accountability. I think that's an incredible way to look at it. And if you're presented in an interview where they say, well, okay, you did this challenge, tell us about that. So, well, I got to work with a customer. I had to have my reviews. I had to, it had to be vetted. Like that's experience. I don't care how you came by it. And if you got a paycheck for it or not, the minute you introduce accountability, it becomes portfolio. It's no longer challenge, is now then portfolio, I would think.
And on top of that, like to your point, you're doing all these other things, that consultative process, like you said, Jenny, maybe data cleaning and things that might not happen in a challenge. It is more skills. And then on top of that, in addition to accountability, which is a really good word, there's also potentially, not always, but potentially outcomes, right? So if you do a challenge, I won, they post it on the website, like, all right, well, that's great. Like, that is nice. You should totally 100% do those. But if you do actual work, then you can also say, and their fundraising increased by 42% this year because of what I did.
Ooh,
Maybe
ooh.
not quite that clear cut always, but so outcomes, which you won't get from a non-real world scenario.
I love that. I love that. So we're getting ready at Think Data to start putting out what we call analysis challenges. And we've done them in our boot camps forever. But because I see so many people just desperate to have challenge work, again, we're going to do analysis challenges coming out, but they are going to be prompts and they're going to be community related. They'll require you to get involved in and around the data sets around your community. I'm really looking forward to doing that. And I say that because I see a lot of people asking, like, how long should you spend on this? How many challenges should you attempt? Like, let's talk about how much time you should dedicate to an effort where, you've gone through the learning process or you're using challenges to help guide in your learning process. How much time do you invest?
I think it depends on how big a gap you're trying to fill. It depends on what your goals are. If you're just feeling a little under engaged in your work life, maybe you do a challenge a month. If you're feeling like your work life's pulling you away from what you need to do, maybe you need to do more. It depends on your goals. Really, I don't think there's a magic number here. I think it depends, and I think you or your spouse or partner or children will let you know when you're doing too much. At least that's how it works at my place.
Okay.
Right?
Good. Bill, you got any thoughts on that?
Can't improve on that answer. Yeah, 100%. It depends.
I'm going to tell you, for some of our younger professionals who are trying to figure out like where I fit in this world of work and career space, and again, to Jenny's point, some people are working full time and then they have full-time life on top of it. One of the things I love my nephew. I adore him. I tell him all the time, he wanted to pursue tech, and I like, okay, well, do you want to pursue tech or do you want to have the idea of what tech looks like in the mainstream media? Like, because tech and what you see portrayed on TV is not the same thing. So once we got him over that, and he was like, he was studying for security, and it was like, how much time am I supposed to put in this? I was like, how much time do you put into your employer's company? And he was like, well, I put in 40 hours a week. I was like, well, then you can't put in 40 hours because you're busy doing that. But how much do you think is worth investing in yourself? Like, again, it's an investment in self. Like, how much time can you carve? And he was like, well, I think I can do. And he came up with some unrealistic number. And I was like, here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. Come up with a number you can stick to. Like, you can consistently do this much and then hit that target consistently. And then as you grow, you may be able to add more to it. So I think the first conversation you have to have with yourself is not how many challenges should I try to do, but how much time do I have actually where I can consistently invest in this effort. And some of it's going to include training some of it's going to include challenge, and some of it's going to be building out that portfolio work. And it's tough.
Yeah.
Bill, how much portfolio work did you do? You started.
So
Did you have a portfolio?
here's the thing. Don't tell my clients I said this, but you said this before, Robin, by the way. So credit to you for saying it first. But I didn't do any of this when I was starting out because essentially my clients would hire me based on me saying, "Oh, I can do that," and then I'd scramble and figure out how to do it. So I was always getting paid to essentially create the evidence that I knew what I was doing, including some pretty big, scary projects. But if I was like, especially today, when there are a gazillion online challenges out there, et cetera, I would do them. And the only answer I can add to both what you and Ginny just said so well is it definitely is more earlier, right? Like I do occasional portfolio work now, like once a year, like the Olympics thing, I'll come up with a data set or something interesting I think I want to explore, and I'll do it. And it's more like it's almost like a hobby as much as it is for my portfolio. But when I was starting out, or if I was starting out today, I would be doing a lot more of it. So yeah, there's no magic number, but more the earlier you are in your career and the more you want to show and prove and improve in your skills, to your point.
Yeah.
Somebody asked a really specific question that I actually want to answer in a grander way, which was, where do we find data sets on things like workplace safety? And it's good to know that most governments maintain either a centralized repository for stuff like this, or they break it out into different places. So I actually like the Canadian data for everything because they keep it in one place called StatCan. How hard is that, right? So all of their statistics are aggregated in one place. For US data, it is, depending on who owns it, workplace safety is kept by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I know this because that's whose name is on the bottom of the little signs about workplace safety in every client I've ever had in manufacturing or fulfillment. So they are keeping track of that, or there wouldn't be a way or a reason for people to say 180 days since our last accident. So I'd look for the Bureau of Labor Statistics for that. But I have to tell you that some of my favorite data always is what's on gapminder.org. And that's data that compares information from a variety of sources about different countries in the world. And so there are lots of data sets. If what you're looking for are data sets that are fun and engaging, that would be a great question one day. Name your top 5 favorite data sets.
Ooh, let's do that.
To work with, because there's a wealth of data out there. But you need to understand how government works wherever you are, whether you're looking for local data, state data, or data that would be aggregated nationally, and then figure out who owns it, unless you're lucky enough to look at a country where the government's thought, oh, someone might actually want to do this.
I'll throw out a couple of other good places to look for fun, interesting data. One is Kaggle, which is a collection of open source data sets from like just normal people. So the data quality is, you have to confirm for yourself whether you can trust the data sets. That's actually where I found the Burrito data set. World Bank is a great resource, kind of like Gapminder. In fact, Gapminder usually is using World Bank metrics.
Yep.
One of my favorites is called Data is Plural. And this is actually a weekly newsletter that this guy puts out with 4 or 5 interesting, quirky little data sets. Some of which are very small data, some of which are larger. Really interesting resource for funky data sets about random, interesting topics. And also 538. Every article published on 538, not every single article probably, but many of them have a corresponding data set, and it's the cleaned data that they used to generate that article. So that's kind of a fun place to find data sets, because you can do your thing with it before you read their article probably, and then read their article and see what they did with it, and then compare notes, and then kind of a fun way of getting sort of like an A/B look at an approach with a data set.
So you could presume your own challenge out of that, actually. I mean,
pretty much, yeah.
Nobody's saying here's the 538 challenge, but you can use the data on
in love with it.
And
in love with it.
And Gapminder also has a series of questions that are available for you to look at, and then you can just dive in, grab data sets, and work with them.
So in love with it. So in love with it. I also like Pew Research. That's a fun one.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And with Pew Research, if you actually if you have an insight and discovery, there's like they encourage you and actually ask you to share it back
Yep.
with them. So I like the idea of maybe encouraging some of us to create our own challenges, because as a person, you have things that you care about. For me, just giving you some examples, I care a lot about education and the impacts of poverty to education. It's a thing. I care very deeply about it. I actually care about housing a lot and the impacts of not having enough of it. I know Gini has a feeling for that. You all have things that you care about, and data is in everything. So if you struggle to create questions on data sets that are random data sets you find, you may struggle less with the types of questions to ask if you develop your own challenge out of things that you're passionate about. And you can really make a great impact in and around your local community. Even if it's a 50-mile radius, that's still that 50 miles is your 50 miles. So I like the fact that I think we should encourage people to do personal challenges. I think that's awesome.
Well, if you just go to Pew Research to their topics list, you're going to find something there that interests you. I mean, Pew does stuff all the way across the board, from how happy are we to what's happening in the life of religious institutions in the United States, what's happening in public education. So they do a lot of softer things that people tend, I say soft, but they have hard data about things that we think are softer that people tend to be more passionate about.
Yeah, they've got some really great studies about math and science education out there as well, mixed in with screen time and things like that you can study.
Yep.
Here's the other thing, to just be very clear and candid. If you are looking for a challenge that is going to inform you about your skills, going to set you apart in an interview, then it can't be one that is handed to you on a silver plate. Those are in the beginning stages when you're learning, right? But if you really want those impactful challenges, you don't want a challenge where someone's saying, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And we have such a strong desire as humans to want someone to just to lay it out for me. But I think you're going to have a more impactful, I mean, even if you just did one and then you got into a job interview and they're talking to you about it, if you take that approach where it's not handed out to you, it's just going to be more, it's going to be more meaningful. It's going to teach you a lot. It's going to teach you a lot. That's just my opinion, though.
Yeah.
I want to appreciate people who like people to tell them the steps to do things. Just thank you all.
Yes.
I have a number of courses you can check out.
That's right. That's right.
That's a goodness. There is sort of a question, I think, that people ask about, okay, if a lot of the stuff in my portfolio is things I wasn't paid for and it's challenge work, how does that really present when I'm in a process of applying for a job? You know, is challenge work taken seriously by people who are recruiting and interviewing and selecting employees? What do you all think?
Well, the world is full of not nice people. So I will just say not nice, uninformed, don't do data, don't get it. So as long as you know you're going to maybe be hit or miss with who will or won't, then yeah, let's have this discussion. Sorry, Bill.
No, I was going to say, like, I'm totally unqualified to even answer that because, I've been self-employed for almost 30 years. I've never worked for a big company. How hiring really works, and especially these days, I have no clue. I can tell you, as someone who hires freelancers, I definitely look at challenge work. And if someone took like the burrito data set, I was impressed by what that guy did. Like, I valued what he created. And if I was considering hiring him, and if that was the only thing I saw, I'd be like, this guy knows his stuff.
Yeah.
At the same time, to your point earlier, I think it was Robin, you just said, if the challenges are just queued up, on a silver platter, then I am going to see through that and say, okay, well, this is someone who is more of a beginner, and that's okay. But those challenges aren't going to reveal to me as much as a deeper, more complex, more nuanced challenge, whether you created it or it came from somewhere else. That being said, yes, there are some people, hiring snobs who will be like, oh, it's only challenge work, it's not real work. Oh, I'm not going to talk to you. Or like, God forbid, even worse than that is like, oh, you've done in this incredible analysis. Oh, but that was in the financial services industry. We're pharma. You don't get us. I'm not hiring you. That's just a reality, right? So you can't do anything about those people. So do the best you can given, what's in front of you, which is do good work, use challenges to do it, and other things if you can.
Yeah, and just realize, just some people are just not nice.
Yeah.
They're just not nice. And guess what? If you're going to be not nice, be not nice at me right up front, because I don't want to work there anyway. Like, I think sometimes people get so hurt and they get so rejected and they tried so hard, and then one person, like, don't let it scar you for life. Again, we are all dealing with people at different levels, different attitudes, different skill sets. Just, if you took it serious and they're not taking you serious, you don't belong there anyway. I can't make it anymore. And anybody that's come under my mentorship and trained with me has heard me say this. You got more power than you think you do. And just don't put yourself in that situation. Don't let someone hurt you and stop you on your path because they don't like your little challenge work. I mean, I was called the little office girl. No, like, they were all like, because I didn't want to do networking, servers, and hardware. I was just, again, the weirdo in the corner doing Excel. Okay, well, I found my path. I found my thing. I didn't want to do that. And so I knew it. And so, yeah, and I know every one of us have encountered that person who didn't take us serious. You take yourself serious. You take your challenges serious, and you be intentional about what you pick and how you work through them. And more often than not, you're going to find your match out there.
I also think it depends on what the alternative is. Like Bill said, if somebody comes in and they have this great challenge stuff and it's what they have, and that's all you have really to think about, then that's probably better than somebody who comes in and says, well, I've wanted to work in data analysis, but for the past year, I've been doing something else. It's like, how did you keep your skills up? Oh, I really didn't, but I always wanted. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like there's a piece of, if the alternative to putting challenges in your portfolio is nothing in your portfolio, I think that's a pretty easy decision to make, to be honest. And I'd be working really hard to find things that allowed me to demonstrate a wide range of things, right? That's the other thing with challenges is maybe you worked in pharma, or you worked in financial services, or you worked in a big marketing firm, whatever you did. You might also then look for some challenges that are in industries you might be equally interested in that are also expanding, right? So go do a financial services challenge. If you know nothing about financial services when you start, you'll have someone you're done, right? So I think there's a way to expand even based on the kind of market verticals that you're interested in showcasing. I'm like Bill and like Robin, actually, in that it's been a long time since I've worked at just one place.
Mm-hmm.
But for a long time in the middle of my career, I actually chose clients based on were they in market verticals that I didn't know much about yet. Would they grow my expertise across verticals? So I didn't get stuck in one place. So I had one client that was in marketing, my biggest client. And other than that, healthcare. That's great. I actually haven't done anything in healthcare yet. Oh, community activism. Wow, that's an interesting thing. What are you tracking there? So I would actually look for work that didn't allow me to get pigeonholed.
Oh, I love that. So
that's great.
And you can do that with your challenges too.
You can definitely do that. I mean, maybe if you get in and you start like realizing, hey, they're not going to care about my challenge work, or this is not going to be important to them. I'll tell you what will be important. When they ask you a question about a technical issue you had to solve and you have a real one, even if it's a challenge, you have a real one, they will know it is real. They will know that you encountered it. They will know that you succeeded. Like, I think even if you don't, like, I'm not going to bring in my portfolio. I'm not too sure how this company is going to deal with that. But then when they ask you those questions and you have real answers that you can turn back to, and then when they say, well, how did you, you could say, well, when I started, I knew I needed to spend some time in these areas, and this is the way that I brought myself to this point. I think some people will find an immense amount of value in that. But I know go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's a really great point, right? Because You can quote well, when you face this challenge, you should do this thing in analytics based on textbook or wherever you learned that. But if you can say, I did it and I did it for this reason, and here's what happened, and here's the problem I ran into, and here's how I fixed it, that's huge. And you can only do that really effectively with a real example.
You wouldn't believe what that data set forced me to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
a nightmare.
Really, that's a real thing, right?
Right.
So,
I never knew there was actually a difference between a hyphen and an end dash until I had a whole data set, right? And it's like, why is everything with a minus sign and error? Who knew? Who knew that one digit change in the ASCII code, and it can take you like weeks. Somebody also had a question about that. I think one of us at least would have a suggestion for. How do you include actual examples in your portfolio if you've signed NDAs with all your clients?
I love this.
Yeah, I was going to point that question out too. I think it's really important.
Bill, you want to jump on this?
Yeah, because what I produce is visual output always. And so, yeah, I have some client contracts that I'm not allowed to show the work that I've done. Like some of my best work, no one has seen, So that can be a challenge. Sometimes you can ask them, first of all, for permission after the fact and say, hey, can I show this? Would it be okay? And occasionally they'll say yes, right? Or sometimes you can ask if you can at least anonymize the data. I've done that many times where I've done work, the visualization reveals real data. Obviously, they're not going to share that out externally. But if I say, what if I take your logo off it? I'll even change your brand colors, and I'll even randomly swap out different numbers. Are you cool with that? And 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, yeah, sure. Why would we care, right?
Yeah.
So anonymizing it, which might take a little bit more work, will often, not always, solve that problem.
I deal with this a lot because most of my work obviously is under NDA, and it's for the eyes only of the teams that are engaged. But here's what I can say. There is always a high level overview of the project that we work in, and you can always ask for the person to be a reference. And if that person's willing to be a reference, and you give them, this is the stated line, here's the reference information, I would like to use this for my portfolio. That is one way to cover that. And I think that's really good. I would say if you are under an NDA, then you have to be very careful with how you share what you share. Don't break agreements in that way. I talk a lot about data governance, data use agreements, data sharing agreements. So that's an excellent question. I think, Bill's right. Sometimes they'll let you tweak it. Sometimes it absolutely won't, but they'll supply a reference, and that can be equally as powerful as seeing an outcome.
2 other thoughts. One is I have occasionally asked to have an NDA changed specifically so I could reuse something. And I think once you've done this once, if you can point them to your portfolio site on GitHub, for example, and say, for example, this is work I did for another client. I obviously am not going to tell you who they are, but you can't tell from what's posted here either. And your work would be equally protected. So, you can write stuff into an NDA, get a better NDA than what you've been given in the past. Because I find it's easy. This is not a case where you want to ask forgiveness instead of permission.
No.
This is not ever
non-starter. Yeah.
And the other thing is that sometimes I've had clients that don't even ask for an NDA, which is kind of shocking to me. But I bet we've all had that. And in that case, you have the opportunity to offer an NDA that gives you some publication right of appropriately anonymized visualizations, for example, or appropriately anonymized data if you have an opportunity. But what I would tell you is just because they don't ask for an NDA doesn't mean you should just use their stuff. You should insist on an NDA that's very clear, because you can get in almost as much trouble without an NDA as you can with one.
Yes. The good advice. That's good advice for those of you who are already building what you would consider like, portfolio level work that you're ready to put out there. Also, just again, because we're out doing a LinkedIn Live and we're short on time here. We're almost to the home stretch. Don't hesitate to use LinkedIn. Like there's stuff you can add to your profile. You can ask for references on your profile. You can leverage that GitHub. I think that's some great advice for today. This has been so fun unpacking all of this portfolio challenge work, like how to teach yourself. I'm just in love with this episode. Yes, I'm just 100%.
Let me see.
I love this one. I'm for it.
All right.
Yeah, but I also enjoy being back with y'all. It's been too long.
I
It's
know.
been way
It's
too
been
long.
too long. So how about we do it again really, really soon?
Let's do
Let's
that.
do that.
All right. Let's tell everybody bye. Let's get out of here.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.
Bye.